Beer is so old that its history begins before written language and possibly before farming itself. Archaeologists studying stone mortars in a cave near modern Haifa found evidence that hunter-gatherers were producing a fermented grain drink around 13,000 years ago. It would not have looked like a modern lager. It was probably cloudy, sour, weak, and closer to liquid porridge than a cold pint. That discovery raises a strange possibility. Humans may not have grown grain only to make bread. Some communities may also have wanted beer. From prehistoric ceremonies to Egyptian wages, medieval monasteries, industrial laboratories, prohibition, and the craft beer revolution, this is the history of the drink that repeatedly changed whenever civilization changed. No one knows who invented beer. The first batch may have happened accidentally. Wild grain became wet, its starches turned into sugars, natural yeast entered the mixture, and fermentation began. Someone tasted the bubbling result instead of throwing it away and discovered that spoiled grain could become something entirely new. Evidence suggests that different societies created fermented grain drinks independently. At Rakafet Cave, researchers identified signs of malting and mashing in mortars used by the Natufian people. In China, vessels from Jiahu contained chemical traces of a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit about 9,000 years ago. These were beer-like beverages, not standardized modern beer, but the essential transformation was already there: grain, water, microbes, and time. The clearest written beer culture appeared in ancient Mesopotamia. As cities grew between the Tigris and Euphrates, beer became part of daily life, religion, and administration. Cuneiform tablets recorded different types and quantities. Workers and messengers could receive beer as part of their rations, meaning a drink was also a form of payment. The Sumerians even had a goddess of brewing named Ninkasi. A hymn in her honor describes malt, beer bread, sweet wort, fermentation vessels, and filtered beer. It is often called the oldest surviving beer recipe, although scholars debate how literally the poem should be read. Ancient beer contained sediment, so drinkers were sometimes shown sharing large vessels through long straws. The straw was not decoration. It helped keep grain husks and floating material out of the mouth. Beer was nourishment, a social drink, and an offering to the gods, all inside the same jar. In ancient Egypt, beer became even more organized. Bread and beer were dietary staples across society. Workers and household staff could be paid with food rations, and Egyptian beer was generally thick, cloudy, nutritious, and probably weaker than many modern versions. Archaeologists at Abydos uncovered the remains of a brewery from around the beginning of dynastic Egypt. Its rows of large vats may have produced thousands of gallons in a single batch, evidence that brewing had already moved beyond the family kitchen into something resembling industry. Beer appeared at meals, festivals, temples, and construction sites. It was not simply a drink people consumed after work. It was part of how work itself was supported. But as beer moved westward, it encountered a powerful rival: wine. The Greeks and Romans usually treated wine as the prestigious drink of civilization. Beer was associated more closely with Egyptians, Celts, Germanic peoples, and communities living in regions where grapes were harder to grow. Roman writers sometimes described beer as foreign or uncivilized, yet their mockery could not erase geography. In cooler northern climates, barley survived where vineyards struggled. Beer remained practical, local, and deeply rooted. After the Western Roman Empire declined, European brewing continued mostly in homes. For centuries, much of that work was performed by women, who made ale for their households and sometimes sold the extra. Beer did not yet have one universal flavor. Brewers used mixtures of herbs and spices, commonly known as gruit. Recipes changed from town to town because brewing depended on local grain, water, plants, and yeast that nobody could see. Monasteries became important centers of larger-scale brewing, but monks did not invent beer. They inherited it, documented it, improved equipment, and produced dependable supplies for their communities, travelers, and pilgrims. Then, one plant transformed the drink: hops. Hops added bitterness that balanced the sweetness of malt. Their antimicrobial properties also helped beer resist certain spoilage organisms. The earliest documented medieval references are limited, but by the later Middle Ages, hopped beer was spreading through northern European trade networks. At first, not everyone welcomed it. In England, ale traditionally meant an unhopped malt drink, while imported hopped beer was viewed as foreign. But hopped beer traveled and stored more successfully. The newcomer gradually won. Governments also realized beer could be controlled and taxed. In 1516, Bavaria issued the regulation later celebrated as the Reinheitsgebot, limiting beer ingredients to barley, hops, and water. Yeast was not listed because its biological role was not yet understood. The law was not simply a timeless recipe for purity. It also regulated prices and protected wheat and rye for bread. Yet, centuries later, it became one of the world's most famous symbols of brewing tradition. While laws controlled ingredients, cold weather was creating another revolution underground. Brewers in Central Europe stored beer in cool caves and cellars. Under those conditions, cold-tolerant yeasts fermented differently from the yeasts used in warmer ale production. The beer matured slowly at low temperatures, a process called lagering, from a German word connected with storage. Lager was cleaner, crisper, and more stable, but it remained difficult to make without reliable cold conditions. Then, in 1842, a Bavarian brewer named Joseph Groll produced a pale lager in Pilsen, in what is now the Czech Republic. Pale malt, soft local water, Saaz hops, and cold fermentation created a clear golden beer unlike the darker and cloudier drinks many customers knew. It became known as Pilsner. The color mattered. Improved glassware allowed drinkers to see the brilliant gold inside the glass. Railways carried it outward. Other breweries copied it. Pilsner-style lager eventually became the visual image many people now picture when they hear the word beer. But copying a style did not guarantee consistency. A brewery could make one excellent batch and then lose the next to contamination. The 19th century turned brewing into science. Louis Pasteur demonstrated that microorganisms drove fermentation and that unwanted microbes could spoil beer. At the Carlsberg Laboratory in Copenhagen, Emil Christian Hansen isolated and propagated a pure yeast culture. In 1883, it was used successfully on an industrial scale, making batches far more predictable. Carlsberg then shared the culture with other brewers. Thermometers, hydrometers, steam power, mechanical refrigeration, bottling equipment, and laboratory control transformed breweries into modern factories. Refrigeration meant lager no longer depended entirely on winter ice or mountain caves. Beer could be brewed year-round and shipped much farther. In the United States, German immigration helped popularize lager during the 19th century. Breweries grew beside expanding cities, railroads, and refrigerated distribution networks. Then America attempted to eliminate the industry. National prohibition began in 1920. Breweries closed, made near beer, produced soft drinks, sold malt products, or shifted into other businesses. Illegal alcohol continued, but the legal brewing landscape was devastated. In 1933, the Cullen-Harrison Act allowed the sale of lower alcohol beer before the 21st Amendment fully repealed prohibition. Crowds celebrated, but the industry that returned was not the one that had disappeared. Large breweries had the money, equipment, and distribution needed to survive national competition. Over the following decades, mergers, television advertising, cans, supermarkets, and mass refrigeration favored a smaller number of enormous producers. Pale lager became lighter, more consistent, and more widely available. Beer had conquered distance, but much of its local variety had been lost. The reaction began in garages and tiny breweries. In 1976, New Albion Brewing opened in California and became an influential model for American microbrewing, despite surviving only a few years. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed legislation creating a federal tax exemption for beer brewed at home for personal or family use. Federal legalization took effect in 1979. Home brewers experimented with styles that had nearly disappeared from mainstream American shelves: intensely hopped ales, porters, stouts, wheat beers, Belgian-inspired ales, and sour fermentation. Some of those hobbyists became professionals. Small breweries and brew pubs multiplied. The movement revived local identity and treated flavor, not simply consistency, as the main attraction. The influence traveled in both directions. American brewers exaggerated the bitterness and aroma of India Pale Ale. European brewers borrowed American hops. New breweries appeared across Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Oceania, mixing global methods with local grains, fruits, spices, and traditions. Beer had entered another cycle. Industrialization created uniformity, and uniformity created demand for difference. Beer was never one invention completed in one place. Prehistoric communities fermented grain for ceremonies. Mesopotamians recorded it on clay. Egyptians brewed it at enormous scale. Medieval households kept it alive. Monasteries organized it. Hops preserved it. Cold caves created lager. Pilsner turned it gold. Scientists made it predictable. Factories made it global. Prohibition nearly erased local brewing, and home brewers helped bring it back. The container changed. From stone mortars to clay jars, wooden barrels, glass bottles, aluminum cans, and stainless steel tanks. The drink changed from thick, sour grain porridge into thousands of styles. But the central idea remained almost unbelievably simple. Take a seed meant to become a plant, persuade it to release its sugar, and let microscopic life transform it. Beer began before history could write down its name. And after 13,000 years of reinvention, humanity is still not finished brewing it.